Okay, very good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for taking your Friday to be here today for our UB Research Essential Series 2. Today's session is going to be very much focused on turning your thesis into an article. So it may be something that you are in currently. You have done your master's, you have done your PhD, the thesis is there, but you have not published, and you have a problem on in trying to get this article out based on your thesis. So today's session is going to be very much focused on how to turn your thesis into publication. As usual, be informed that this session is being recorded. Okay, all your microphones are muted currently. So if you have any question, you can raise your hand or you can put some question in the chat and we will come back to your question at the end of the session. All right. So turning your thesis into an article. So if you look at this whole issue of turning your thesis into an article, it can be stressful if you do not manage the experience well, okay? But at the same time, converting your thesis, or it can be a dissertation, it can even be a capstone project into a journal article, do not need to be stressful because all your material that is needed for your article is there. So the bulk of the work is done. It is not that you're writing a new research or new article. Your article is based on this thesis that is already in front of you. But the biggest problem you face is there's just so much of information in the thesis. How can I extract what fits into the journal that you want to publish? So today's session is very much to focus on this. The first thing is let's understand what is the difference between a thesis and a journal article. And then there are tips on how do you turn this thesis into an article. And we will go through all these tips one by one. Okay, so different audience, different standards. So remember, what is the main objective of a thesis and what is the main objective of a journal article? Okay, who looks at this? Two different documents. So if you look at dissertations and thesis, there are dissertation committees who are actually reviewing this thesis. So as it basically assess whether a student's work has fulfilled the program's outcome and requirement. And that is basically the main aim of having this dissertation or thesis. So it does not assess whether that publication, that thesis, the materials in the thesis is ready for publication, or is it ready for the general public to actually read. So you are trying to now extract this information from this thesis into a journal article, because a journal article is normally peer reviewed. Okay, so the peer reviews do not care whether this thesis is a past thesis or failed thesis. They don't care about it. They're going to review it independently. So these are experts in the field who will be reviewing. We have done a session before on peer review, okay? The blinded review, double blinded review, triple blinded review. There's so many types of review that we have done in the past. So at the end of the day, a journal article's main objective is to review the article independently. So this is critical for you when you write your thesis. So if you look at the differences between thesis and articles, so there's a lot of information on the screen here, okay? You can read it. Meets, if you look at thesis, meets academic requirement, reviewed by selected committee members. It's all arranged based on chapters. It's very lengthy. Okay, the word limit will depend on the requirement of the graduate program. At the master's level may be different. At the PhD level may be different. At the master's level, normally it's about 30,000, 25 to 30,000. At the PhD level, it can go up to about 80 to 100,000 words. There's a table of contents that is provided, lengthy research, especially in terms of the literature review. This is very critical in a thesis. IRB approval is described in detail as part of the requirement of the thesis. Description and copies of tools used are elaborated very clearly. The findings are presented. The way the verb tenses that is used in the thesis may be slightly different as well. Whereas when you look at articles, it follows the requirement of that particular journal. So you got to be careful on how you write. What is the aim? What is the scope of the journal? And you write based on it, because the panel that is going to review are selected based on their expert and also based on what is the expectation of the journal. If your article do not meet to the scope of the journal, it is not going to make it. It will not make it. The articles are divided into several sections. Okay, there are word limitation. You cannot just write as you wish. It is not 80,000 or 50,000. It can be 4,000. It can be 5,000. So that the words are limited. The manuscript are formatted in a particular format that you got to follow. It has to be really precise, succinct in the way how you present, especially the literature. You do not have place for you to write a lengthy literature review as what you do in thesis. So you must learn how to write it very succinctly. Okay, IRB can be described in 1 or 2 lines. You don't have to go to a great length to talk about IRB. Essential and succinct tool information is described in the articles because you do not have much space. Selected findings only. So not everything in the thesis needs to be captured into one article. Okay, so the table on your right hand side, there are more details that you can read when you get access to these slides. Okay, the information about the purpose, potential audience, the length, the abstract, introduction, materials and method, discussion, reference, and appendices. It's all slightly different thesis compared to a journal. So let's look at all these tips, the important tips. Tip number 1, identify the appropriate target journal. Okay, so this is critical. Make sure to read the aims and scope of journals you are interested in to publish in, because if your paper do not fall within the journal scope, you are wasting your time. If your research falls outside the aim and scope, look for more suitable home for your paper. As if you go on wasting your time sending this paper, you will get a desktop rejection immediately. Although your research can be the best research out there, but it may not fit into the requirement of the journal. Check each journal's recommended structure and reference style for articles on its website. So this can be found in most of the journal website. Okay, guide for authors. Look out for it to ensure your paper is not rejected. This is important. Although your paper is formatted based on the requirement of the university for your thesis, it may not be the same for a particular journal. So check on it. There are also other ways that you can identify the appropriate target journal. There's one site that I put on the screen here. It's called Jane, the journal author name estimator. It's a good resource that I've used before as well. You can just cut and paste your abstract normally, your title and abstract, and it will actually give you some recommendation what other journals may be suitable for you to publish. Okay, it is not 100% accurate because you should know your field much better than this application, but this application actually allows you and it gives you quite an accurate recommendation on what are the areas that you may want to look at to publish. Or ask colleagues to read your abstract and provide recommendations. Okay, a lot of your colleagues may have published. Your network, your linkages, they can also give you the recommended publication that you need to aim for. Review journal websites. Okay, journals that you are aiming to publish, look at it. Okay, look at it to ensure that these journals are worth publishing. You don't want to fall into these predatory journals that we have discussed in the past before. So I've put some links here for you to look out for. At the same time, one of the best places to actually check if a particular journal is suitable for your thesis is to check with your librarian. Your librarian is your best resource person who can actually tell you whether this particular journal is worth publishing or not. And I do that always. I always write to Miss Ballance to say, I've got this invite. Is this something that I should spend my time with? And then I really value the response that I get, because you will get to understand whether this particular journal has an impact factor, whether the author's information is the authors, the editors are someone that is that you want to be associated with. So the whole review process and how do the metrics of measuring the quality of this journal is actually identified. So it is very important for you to look at that before you decide to see whether a particular journal is legit or is it phony. Even by looking at the website, sometimes you can actually you are able to see whether this particular journal is more into the money rather than the actual publication. So just look at some of his website and you will be able to see how does a good journal website look like and how does a phony one looks like, where the focus is really not the article, but it's more of turning around your paper. The faster, the more money that they make. So you got to be very careful how you look at it. Tip number 2, shorten the length of your thesis. So this is another challenge that we always face, because your thesis is 50,000, 60,000, 70,000 words, and you want to bring it down to 4,000 to 5,000 words. So journal articles are typically much shorter than thesis. So the precise word limit will normally be stated normally in the guidelines for the authors. So be sure to use a tighter framework and a more compact style when you are writing the thesis. No matter it is not a matter of just copy and pasting. Okay, don't just copy and paste from the thesis and you say, okay, I just copy the introduction, a bit of materials, a bit of results, a bit of the conclusion, and I'm done. It's not that. It doesn't work that way. You have to sometimes rewrite the content. The main content is that, but you got to rewrite. Treating your thesis as a separate new work is important. Your base is your thesis, but it is still like writing a new piece of uh, paper. So paraphrasing where needed to express the same idea in different ways becomes critical as well. Selecting parts of your thesis to repurpose, not all of it, but at least to focus on the main point that you want the reader to understand. Because all these main points will come based on what is your aim of writing this publication. Because remember, in your thesis, you may have 4 objective or 5 objective or even 6 objective. You may say that I just want to focus on the first 2 objective for this article. That's all. So what you extract from your thesis is going to be based on these 2 particular objective. Your thesis may have more than that. Tip number 3, reformat the introduction as an abstract. Writing an abstract can be difficult, but lucky for you, you have the whole thesis in front of you. So you are not basically writing from zero. You already pretty much have a good place to start. While abstracts in journal articles are usually shorter, okay, about 100 to 250 words than the average thesis introduction, the two have one thing in common, okay, the thesis and the introduction and the abstract. Both should contain all the key elements to command the reader's attention and encourage them to read further. And that is exactly what the abstract is doing. So using your introduction and part of your discussion as a basis for your abstract can be a good starting point when you start writing your article. Number 4, modify the introduction. Your thesis may have more than one research question, as I mentioned, or hypothesis, which are not all relevant for your paper. So you got to be clear what is the aim of this particular paper. So consider combining your research questions or focusing on a single one for the article that you are writing. Unless otherwise suggested, try to keep the introduction short and to the point. It can also be very helpful to use previously published paper. So normally whenever I publish, I will try to find at least three articles from that journal that I want to publish. Okay, so the target journal that you want to publish, and then try to see how do they format it, how do they write, what is the structure like. So try to fit your work into the format that is provided in the journal. So by looking at least 3 articles, then you know, okay, this is the flow, this is what is expected from this particular journal. And this is important because at the end of the day, what is key is you do not want you do not want your articles to be rejected, desktop rejected, without even going through the whole review process. Number 5, tighten the method section. If you look at your thesis work, we spend a lot of time writing detailed information of the method, how to carry out this method. Okay, there is no need for an overlay descriptive method section for any journal article. You don't need to put in too much of details in a journal article. While concerns surrounding reproducibility becoming increasingly important, you may want to keep your method as brief, precise as possible, and certainly remember that your audience who are reading this article may know a lot of the stuff that you're trying to put there. So your peers probably do not need every detail. When you say you're using a certain approach, let's say sampling. So I'm using a convenient sampling. It's understood. In a thesis, you may be explaining more. Okay, I'm using convenient, or what is convenient sampling, you're trying to explain more. But in an article, you don't need to do that. People understand what do you mean by convenient sampling. Just leave it there. So you don't have to go to the extent of explaining or defining, having a literature to support what is this convenient sampling all about. You don't need to do that. A longer description of methods may be a requirement from your institute or funding body, okay, especially if you are talking about your thesis. But in an article, it is not. So it's a good idea to again use previously published paper in that target journal as your guide. Okay, go through the and see how do they write the methodology section. That will actually tell you exactly what is expected from you. Report main findings in result. Be sure to present all findings that are relevant to your research questions in the results section before the discussion. But of course, again, it differs from one journal to another. That's why I keep saying always look at least 3 articles from that particular journal before you decide to publish in that particular journal to see the the protocols in that particular journal, the guidelines in that particular journal. In some journals, the results section and the discussion is done together. In some journals, it is done separately. So if you have conducted an exploratory analysis, be sure to provide at least a few concise statements on the findings. Okay, so it's still important for you to do that. Number 7, ensure discussion is clear and concise. A good starting point for a discussion section is an interpretation of your result. Okay, so what is it that the reader will have learned from your research? So that is important because in your thesis, sometimes you get clouded with the knowledge that you have in your thesis, and the expectation is when someone read your article, he understand your thesis work, but it's not. These are 2 independent documents. So what you write in the journal article is very precise, but you should be able to explain or clarify the information independently from your thesis. Do not repeat your results in the discussion section. You have put the results section, and then when you come to results, when you come to discussion, you repeat the same information again. Because remember, you have limitation in your word count in a research in a journal article. So you got to be very precise when you have reported something somewhere else. Do not repeat the same information again. Situate your findings in the literature. So this is also important in your result. Tie it back to your literature. What does it result? How does this result ties back to the existing literature? Is it contradicting? Is it something different? You got to always do that. Discuss how your findings expand the current knowledge or perspective that you have in the current field. And sometimes your thesis may be obsolete. Remember that. When you write an article, you need to clarify this information, to update this information, because maybe the thesis was written pre-COVID and post-COVID, the situation have changed. So you need to put that in. You can't say that, oh, this is based on my thesis, so I do not need to update. No, if you're writing a journal article, you have to still update your information. Briefly present ways in which future studies, okay, can be built upon. Okay, this is important. Your limitation is the same in your thesis as well, but it's as important in your article as well. And it has to be presented very concisely. Number 8, limit number of references. So in your journal article, sometimes your reference list can be 10 pages long or 15 pages long, just reference. You cannot afford to have 10, 15 pages in a journal article. So your journals limit sometimes in the number of how much of references that you want to use. So the way you write, the way how you reference a certain article is very key, because if you're going to be taking the page count of the journal the bulk of it is coming just from your reference list, then there's a problem in the way how you have actually written your article. So unlike your thesis, where you can actually cite those foundational yet potentially dated sources and anything else you may have learned from, but journals sometimes will limit that. So you want to just put the article that is directly relevant to what you are actually researching on. So that is why it is, for this reason, it is so important to make sure to choose the most relevant, the most recent citations for your publication. That citations are formatted correctly, okay, based on the requirement of the journal. So if you're using a good reference manager system like Mendeley, which we have discussed in the past before as well, to make this will make your life much easier, okay. When you're picking the most relevant citation or quickly reformatting them, you'll be thankful that you have an application, because from one journal to another, it may be different type of referencing system. Tip number 9, determining authorship, copyright, and the publishing model. So this is another important thing that you have to think about when you are trying to move from your thesis into publication. So if you look at this, authorship, first thing, let's talk about authorship. In a thesis, you are the author. You are the, it carries your name. Of course, your supervisor name appears within your acknowledgement as someone who have supervised, but the thesis itself is under your name. So you have to decide at the outset in a journal article, who will be your author. Is your supervisor going to be your author as a co-author? Whose name comes first? It depends. But in most cases, the student's name will actually come first as the first author, then followed by the supervisor's author if the supervisor is directly involved in helping you. So it doesn't mean that automatically because he is your supervisor, his name must come. But if he has not contributed towards that particular journal article, then his name may not appear as well. But of course, at the same time, you see in many situations where you have the supervisor's name being forced into, sometimes the head of department's name being forced into, the dean's name being forced into, or someone who's involved in the funding force their names. So it depends on how you handle these names. So ensure a complete understanding of the roles and responsibility for this manuscript development is discussed way in advance. If you're going to carry 3 names, discuss in advance with this 3 person, okay? You're going to be responsible to do what part of this article, when do they come in, and what is their role. Follow the general ethical standard of authorship that I've listed on the screen here. Substantial contribution to the conception or design or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data. This is important. Have you contributed in that way? Drafting the work or revisiting it critically for important intellectual content. Have they done that? Okay. They may have done that at the thesis level. So now when you rewrite the article, they got to be involved further. Final approval of the version to be published. So sometimes you've written the whole thesis and then it goes to this co-author to check the whole work and restructure it, improve it further, add few more things, maybe a few more citation missing. You want to add a few more analysis. So that is important as well. Then your name can be carried. Commitment to be accountable for all aspects of the work. So all the authors must be committed. So when a co-author is asked a certain question about an article, the co-author cannot wash the hand to say, oh, I'm just the second author, so I'm not aware of this article. You can't do that. You must be committed and accountable for the journal. Although you are the second author or you are the third author, you have to know the article that your name is being used. Copyright. Okay, so this is another issue that is also important. The copyright of all theses in most universities is within the university. Okay, it falls under the university. But when you publish something, material that is coming out from your thesis, there will be a copyright transfer of that article. So determine for certain who holds the copyright to the dissertation, okay? Especially in an institution. So you got to see what is a policy in the institution with regards to copyright. So in most universities, you are allowed to publish and the copyright of the article that is being published, that is coming out from the thesis, actually be transferred to a particular journal. But the copyright of the whole thesis itself will still reside in the university. So publishers will expect normally in journal articles, authors to sign off a copyright form. So before you sign that off, you got to ensure that you are protected, whether this is going into what sort of journal, and is it an open access journal, or is, what sort of journal, which I will now. So what kind of models, the publishing models that we are looking at. So there are, of course, the traditional publishing models, which we have discussed in the past as well, where authors publish free of charge. This is where the bulk of the journals are. And the subscribers, the institution or the individual, basically pay to read your article. So that's how they make the money. At the same time, of course, now we have the open access publishing, where the author pays a publication fee, okay, in some cases, to retain the copyright. And articles are made freely for all to make themselves available. So we will be dealing a lot more on this open access in our next workshop on the 16th, Understanding Open Access Publication. So if you're really interested to understand more about open access, please do come for the next session. So under this open access, there are two different types as well, the green open access and the gold open access. The green open access is after submission and peer review in the subscription journal, article is published online, and the subscribers have immediate access. Whereas in the gold open access, it depends on the article publishing charge. Okay, so based on that, then the articles it can be immediately be accessed online. So it differs slightly from one approach to another, and depending on what you are signing up for. In terms of the manuscript, so when you publish something, whether although the article is coming from your thesis, it will still go through the same process when you prepare this manuscript. Publishers often make a distinction between three primary version of a manuscript: the preprint, the postprint, and the publisher's version, or the PDF, or sometimes you even use the term as off prints that comes out from your thesis, from your article. So the preprints is the original version of the manuscript as it is submitted to a journal. So while the authors may have sought help from their colleagues in selecting data analysis technique, improving manuscript clarity, and correcting grammar, the preprint has not been through any peer review process. So it is basically a Microsoft Word double space document that has not gone through the typesetting or peer review. So that is the original article. So that is your preprint. So in some journals, they allow the preprints to be put elsewhere. You want to put the preprint, or you want to share the preprint, fine. I think they don't worry too much. Postprint is a document that has been through the peer review process and incorporated the reviewer's comment. So it is the final version normally of the paper before it is actually sent to the journals for publication. It may be missing a final editing, the copy editing work, but the format will actually look almost like the journal. Okay, so again, it depends on the requirement of the journal whether you are allowed to put a post print or not. So again, this is something that you always need to check with the publisher. And then of course the last one is the publisher version. Basically is the PDF version of your actual article. So this version of record is published on the publisher's website. Okay, so now we are in a digital environment where hardly you get any physical prints of the journal. It's all in this format. It looks good, professionally typeset by the publisher, and library database will like to link to this version of the paper. It's also called the off prints, reprints of an article printed exactly as what you see in the journal. So the title of the article appears on the page, although in the actual journal it may be arranged on an odd page or even page, but here it will still come in as a nice off print of all your pages. So generally speaking, publishers are more likely to be okay with authors posting copies of preprint versus the complete publisher version. So if you put a publisher version where the copyright is held by the art journal, and then you put it up for free, you put it up in ResearchGate and anyone can access it, you can get into trouble with the publisher. So be very careful with that. So to conclude, there's a few golden rules here. Keep in mind the interests and expertise of the journal readers, not necessarily colleagues of the institution at which the doctoral work was done. So remember that it's two independent things. So when you write something that is coming from your thesis, it is targeted to an audience that is not familiar with the doctoral work or your master's work or the work that you have put in your thesis. So you have to keep that in mind always. Follow the guidelines. This is important. Every journal have different guidelines. Don't follow your thesis guideline. It may not be valid. The style of writing, the requirement, the word count, the references, all got to follow your journal article. Consult an experienced author before submitting to a journal. Okay, so this is always good to run past a faculty or mentor or advisor who have actually published something themselves. If in that particular journal, much better. If you know an author from that particular journal that you want to publish, consult them and, and get their assistance. Ask someone who speaks the language in which the journal submission, or consider using a professional language service. So especially if you are trying to structure your work according to the requirement of the journal, sometimes you may find it difficult to understand what is the requirement, what is the flow of writing, the expectation in the language requirement. All those things becomes very important. Present content that is current, clear, practical, and meaningful, not based on what is already in the thesis only, but what is relevant now. The thesis may be 1 year old, 2 years old. What are the relevant publications that came out after that? Is it still relevant, or is there some new development that has taken place? Emphasize what is new in order to justify the publication. So answer the so what question. So this is important in any journal article. Ensure that the text for the aims, most of the literature reviews, and all of the findings and discussion sections are different for each manuscript submitted for publication. So remember, I told you one thesis can actually contribute 2 articles, 3 articles, 4 articles. It depends on how you structure. You may have 5 objectives, and each objective is going to be one paper. So although each objective is one paper, the source is coming from the same thesis. So when you extract the relevant information, be very careful. Don't just cut and paste and you realize 2 of the papers looks identical. So you got to be very careful when you pull out information from your thesis. You got to always paraphrase it and be very clear what are you looking in that thesis. So when you just cut and paste, then the probability is very high. You're going to plagiarize, self-plagiarize your own work, and you're going to have few articles that looks identical. Use language that is interpretable from a scientific perspective and free of bias. Because remember, your word count is limited. You got to be very precise on the kind of words that you use to describe the work that you have put. Because in thesis, the tendency we try to write lengthy because we have the space to write as much as we want to write. Okay, so there are some references here. I've got a lot of this presentation today. I've adapted a lot from Elsevier. So when you have the time, do go to the Elsevier resources. They have a lot of wonderful resources in publication, authorship, in the ethics, the publication process, how do you manage authorship. A lot of details are there. There are also other resources that you can get through. So I will pass this slide to you. I will send to all those who have signed up today for this session, and I hope this session will help you further in trying to convert your publication into a journal article. So I will now open the floor for any questions, any feedback that you have, any challenges that you have that you want to share, anything that you want to ask us. Please feel free to ask. You can raise your hand if you want to speak, or you can just put something in the chat box and I can look at it as well. Ms. Ballance, you want to add anything before we open the floor?
Thank you, Vic. That was very interesting. I would recommend anybody who is not sure, before sending your paper out to a journal, you can test the waters by either writing to the journal and asking if they would be interested in a paper like yours. That's entirely acceptable. You write to the editor and sort of outline what you did your study on and whether they would entertain a paper on the topic. That's also a way. Another thing is to consult with some people locally. The editors of the IJBS have some experience with reviewing and preparing papers for publication. So you can just pass it by one of the editors or former editors or even the librarian to have a look before you send it out to see if it matches up, if it looks like it's a publishable paper. Those are just a few little points.
Yes, indeed. So there's a lot of help. So don't worry if you are struggling or to find a suitable journal, because there's so many journals out there, and it can be confusing which is good, which is bad, which is highly ranked. But it is always good to run past the library, especially because they have all the relevant information. Let me unmute you. Uh,
Monique.
Monique, yes.
Yes, yes. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your presentation and very, very good tips. I wanted to ask something outside of the journal article publications. What about chapters in a book? How much do these points overlap with that?
Yes, the chapters in the book and also journal article almost the same. But if you look at a chapter in the book, the chapter in the book is you can write slightly longer compared to the journal articles. It depends very much on what is the chapter about. Sometimes it is an edited book. The chapter is based on a particular theme. So then you go to skew your chapter accordingly. The chapter may be actually coming from your work from a thesis, which is fine. But the way how you write it may be slightly different. But then normally if you have a editor, a book editor, that is the job of the book editor. He will make sure all the chapters are aligned correctly. Normally the chapter, the journal, the book editor who's requesting for the chapter will write the introduction chapter and will write the conclusion chapter. So he got to make sure that all the other chapters are aligned. So whatever I've discussed today here is still relevant for the book chapters as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody working? Okay, Leslie, let me. Okay, Leslie, I've unmuted you. Can you? Are you still? I'm trying to.
Hello?
Okay,
You
yes,
can hear
we
me
hear.
now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it. For my thesis, but I have a question with regards to report. So
Okay.
like I did the living wage report,
Yes.
right? And I submitted it to my institute, but I'm also supposed to be publishing from it. So my plan, and I want to know if this is necessary or if I did too much work. I had planned to submit it locally for a local journal, a regional journal, and an international journal, but I was taking a different approach. Like for the local journal, I was just submitting it for New Providence. For the regional journal, I was submitting New Providence and Grand Bahama. And then for the international journal, I was submitting it in the context of urbanization or disaster management and drawing some correlations between there. And all of those require a little bit more information. Is it necessary to diversify it so much? Or could I just take the one document and just write it differently without adding the new component?
No, I don't encourage you to have one approach and then you just rewrite it in different way. Let's say you're taking the data from from New Providence and Grand Bahama and the international experience, and then putting it into one paper and then rewriting it 3 different ways. I think that's not the right approach. I think what you're doing now is correct. You have one article that is just focusing on New Providence, and then you are doing a comparative study focusing New Providence and Grand Bahama, and then there's another one that is actually bringing the whole international perspective in. So you have 3 different approach that you're looking at. So when you write as well, it's important that you don't just have chunks of paragraph that is identical in your 3 different articles that you're writing. It has to be independent. The way how you presented the results will be slightly different as well. Although yes, the base data for the New Providence one may be the same, but then here now you have added a few other things, and then the literature got to change. The way you write it will change slightly as well. You can't have the same info, because I've experienced this as a reviewer and editor before, where I received articles, the same 2 different manuscript, because I'm sitting in 2 different journals, and then coincidentally 2 articles came from, and although it is blinded, but when I look at the article, I say, oh, it's the same research. It's just rewritten differently. They paraphrased it, but when you look at it, it's exactly the same objective, the same data, but it's presented differently. That's all. But in your case now, I think it's very important for you to differentiate what kind of information is going into the first one for the local one, what is going into the regional one, and what is going for the international. Because remember, for an international reading, your audience is different. What they expect is quite diverse. So you want to relate your findings to what is happening internationally. But for the local one, maybe it is not as critical. What is important for the local one is what is the local scene. We need to understand how it is impacting the local population. So it has to be written in a 3 different approach, and not the same information is just rewrittenly, but the information is exactly the same in the 3 articles. Then you're going to be still, although the article is not exactly the same, but it's exactly the same information, the same objective, the same research question that you're dealing with. So you got to be very careful in how you deal. But I think what you are doing now is correct, having 3 different components inside the 3 different articles.
Yes, I concur with you, Vic, that you can't just recycle the same paper.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can make what they call salami slices of a topic, but it can't be the same, basically the same paper with just a little bit more and a little bit more. It has to be a completely different paper.
Yeah.
Because you have to have a different perspective.
Yeah, another important thing to add to this discussion is sometimes when you're involved in a funded consultancy project, and a lot of PhD students do work with their supervisor in consultancy work. And when you're involved in consultancy work, it becomes a bit more tricky, because a lot of the data in the consultancy project, the copyright of those data is not with the university. It falls from the funding body. So if the funding body do not allow you to use this data, you cannot publish this. They say, okay, you can use it for your thesis, but not for general public publication. So you got to be very careful how you handle this. So if your aim is, I'm going to use this data even for my PhD work, you got to get this sorted out right up front to say that, are you allowed to publish this for general public viewing? Because normally most funding body will allow you to use for your thesis, because it is very much an internal thing. It's a requirement for your studies, but they may not allow you to publish into a journal. But at the same time, you also have some funding body, like for instance, today I've sent out an email where you have some funding body, foundation, let's say Templeton Foundation now, they have a new requirement where they want every article that is coming out from project funded by Templeton Foundation to be published in open access journal only. Why? They want more people to read this work. So you got to look at the requirement of the particular journal that you want to publish. So especially when you're doing your consultancy work, be very, very careful, because you do not own the rights of that article. You're paid as a consultant to carry out the study. That's it. You hand over the data and you don't own this data unless they allow. There will always be a clause. You need to seek prior permission before you can use this data for any form of dissemination of the information. Okay, any more question or feedback, or you have any challenges? Feel free to email us anytime that you have a problem. I do have a lot of guests always walking into my room before with the same question on journal, how to convert their thesis. Some of them have just finished their PhD work or master's work, and they have a problem of trying to dissect the thesis, and they sit on it. They sit on it. They say, "Oh, this is too much and too much." And sometimes after 1 year, 2 years, you have not done anything, and your thesis work is wasted. You've spent 3 years, 4 years, and you're happy to get your PhD, happy with your thesis, but you have not published anything at the end of the day. So what is important is for you want people to read. Most people do not read your thesis, but they will read your article. So chunks, bits and pieces of information coming from your thesis, and you put it in a form that people will read. Then you will, as you do this article, you will realize that, oh, I can spin off this study to another angle. I did my thesis on this, but the more update I put into this article, you will get ideas to move to another area. That is how you expand your scholarship. That is how you start. You start from your thesis, and then you start branching out. And then 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, you track back and see where did you start, and you see where did you end up. So it'll be very interesting for you to see how your knowledge have gone over the years as you start working on articles and journals. That's why it's very important. That's why I always tell every faculty, it is important. If you're a lecturer, you must publish. If you don't publish, you will never expand the knowledge that you have. You will never be able to bring this relevant research information into the classroom. Classroom teaching is not just based on textbook. Okay, it must be based on research, based on what is happening at the ground, what are the challenges, and how we are using research to solve that, and let's bring that into the classroom. Then the teaching in the classroom become more relevant. Yes, any more feedback, question? I know the time is, we are 5 minutes out of our time. If there is no more feedback or question, thank you for coming to the session today. The recording of the session will be made available as long as you have registered. The recording plus the presentation slides will be there. All the hyperlinks that is needed, more reading that is needed, is all in the presentation slide. Feel free to write to me or Miss Ballance anytime that you have a problem. The recordings will be emailed to you. You will get, if those of you have come to this session, at the end of this session, normally we will send you the recordings of the session plus the materials that we have used for this presentation. So no worries, because since you are in this session now, you will get, because you have to be registered in order to get into this session. So you will get the information. So I will make sure that you get all the information. If you have missed out any of the last few workshops that we've held, and you did not register, but then you realize that, oh, I missed this, can I get information? Please feel free to email at research@ub.edu.bs. Okay, we can still get the information for you, the link of the recording and the materials. So anytime that you need anything that has been done in the past and you still want it, we do have every single session is recorded. Every single session there is presentation materials, there's reading lists. So please feel free to ask us anytime. All right then. So with that, once again, I would like to invite you for the next session on the 16th October, Understanding Open Access Publication. This will be done by Ms. Virginia Ballance. So for those of you who have a lot of questions on open access, which is getting more and more popular now, please do not miss this session. So have a pleasant weekend. It's a bit cloudy today. It's already raining over here. So stay indoors, stay safe, and see you all again next week. Bye-bye. Thank you, Ms. Ballance.
Thank you, Dr. Vic. Till next time.
Bye then.
Bye-bye.